Let's read our theme verse again. We're going to use the same version that we used last week, and then we will resume our discussions. This is, as soon as I get to it on this other screen, okay. Matthew 16, 13 through 20 from the Voice. Jesus then went to Caesarea Philippi. Jesus to his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" The disciples, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." Jesus, "And you? Who do you say that I am?" Peter, "You are the anointed one, you are the Son of the living God." Jesus, "Simon, son of Jonah, your knowledge is a mark of blessing, for you didn't learn this truth from your friends or from your teachers or from sages you've met on the way. You learned it from my Father in heaven. This is why I've called you Peter, rock, for on this rock I will build my church. The church will reign triumphant even at the gates of hell. I'll say that again. The church will reign triumphant even at the gates of hell. So before we move on, that's what we have been talking about the gates of hell. Now we're talking about this church. And one of the characteristics of this church, according to Jesus and according to this version, is that church will reign triumphant at the gates of hell. Are we currently part of that church? Technically, yes. Is the church acting that way? Are we reigning triumphant? Are we even at the gates of hell? Okay. 19. Peter, I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Jesus ordered his disciples to keep these teachings secret. Jesus, you must tell no one that I'm anointed. I'm going to go back to verse 19, and we're going to talk about this later, much later, but I want you to see the connection now. This church that he's creating, and last week we defined that word as ekklesia, not church. So we're going to start talking about what this ekklesia is. This church, the one that reigns triumphant at the gates of hell. And then the next thought is, I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, or will have already been bound in heaven. So do you see a connection between this ecclesia thing and the kingdom? One thought flows into the next. So what does the ecclesia, are they separate entities? The kingdom is one thing and the ecclesia is something else. The ecclesia are the agents of the kingdom. And we're going to spend a lot more time talking about that later. But in your head, start developing that connection that, okay, this thing that he's raising up, this ecclesia, this triumphant church, is going to exercise kingdom authority at the gates. They're going to be ambassadors, representatives, administrators, however you'd like to term it, of the kingdom at the gates. Just want you to start putting that piece together and start thinking through that as we start defining what this ecclesia is. All right. Last week we learned that this church that reigns triumphant at the gates was this thing that Jesus is launching or referring to or drawing attention to. We haven't yet decided whether he's creating something new or whether he is playing on an existing concept that they already had and just maybe repurposing it. We'll discuss that probably next week, but we'll get to that. What is this? Is this a new thing or is this an existing thing that he is repurposing or redefining? Anyway, we'll get to that point. We haven't yet decided is this new, but this is the first reference of this concept of this thing in the New Testament. So Jesus first calls this thing out that he's creating, ecclesia, call it church, whatever, this organization that he is creating. This is the first reference of that thing in the New Testament. So it's fairly significant that is occurring and that Jesus is doing it, and he was the first one to launch it. Okay, we talked about that Greek word being ekklesia. Today, we're going to talk about the fact that ecclesia does not equal church. Ecclesia does not equal church. All right, let's see if we can dive into this a little bit. I want to, let's go to here. Okay. The Ekklesia, we talked about it being the Strong's word, Greek G1577. It's a compound of X, Strong's 5737, meaning among, from, or out of. It denotes origin. It's also a derivative of kaleo, G2564, which means called, bid, invited, or named. Literally, ecclesia means called out. Putting all this together, you get the universal, total body of believers whom God calls out of the world and into his eternal kingdom. Now, does God have a purpose for calling us into his kingdom? Part of the purpose is fire insurance. We don't have to go to hell. Thank God for that. And I don't want to diminish that. I don't want to marginalize that at all. But we've got our fire insurance, and so many people stop after fire insurance. Okay, I'm good. I don't have to worry about anything else because I'm not going to hell. Well, yay, praise God. That's the starting point for what God really wants to establish. And as long as you're just happy with getting your fire insurance and not going to hell, you're never going to be a full-fledged member, if you want to call it that, of this new thing that Jesus is trying to create. You could make the argument. I could also argue it from the other side too. It gets into the whole once saved, always saved sort of debate, and I can play both sides on that. And I've heard arguments on that, both sides. It really comes down to Jesus never intended for you to be very passive about this. He wants it to be an active, ongoing pursuit rather than just a box that you checked off. So, go ahead. Is it sin? I don't know. That's above my pay grade to make that determination. If that's all you want out of it, I don't know that he would say no to that, but you're going to miss out on the greater realities and the life, the greater impact, the greater manifestations that are available to you if that's your only desire. I would say that chances are very good that if your fire insurance is your only objective, then you're going to dabble in sin more so than somebody that's not their only objective. You're going to hang out there. Correct. Correct. And those things may end up costing you, uh, possibly significantly. And I don't know what happens in that case. Were you dumb for being there? Yeah. Did accidents happen? Yeah. Again, I'm not getting into that. That's not really the point of this discussion. You're missing out on the thing that Jesus actually intended you to walk in if that's your only goal.
It wasn't to stay put and just be satisfied with that. It was to follow him.
Right.
I think, in every church, you're going to have those who follow closely and those who follow a distance. God loves them, and thank goodness he's the one that judges them.
I think it's interesting that there were 12 of them. One of them was called out. And then I think that shows you the power of the faith of one.
Peter was called out in our text. Okay.
They offer them life. I think that's the power because Jesus lived not too long after that.
Right.
And I think that's the power of one person.
Good. So today I'm going to suggest, and again, grant me some trust at the beginning, and I'll hope to prove it out to you. The translation of ecclesia in the New Testament, when it is translated as church, I'm going to suggest that's wrong. That translation is inaccurate. There was some intentionality behind doing it, so it wasn't a mistake. It was just intentionally wrong, and there's a reason that it was intentionally wrong. Now let's talk about that concept. Let's introduce that today by looking at the word church in a couple of dictionaries. Let's just see what the dictionaries say about it. This is Merriam-Webster. You see the link there at the top. If you look up church in the Merriam-Webster.com dictionary, as a noun, a building place for public religious services, especially Christian worship. a body or organization of religious believers, such as the institution of the church, of the Christian religion as seen as an organization, the clergy or officialdom. That's an interesting word. Officialdom. Officialdom. That's kind of fun to say. Officialdom. Have to use that word somewhere in a sentence today. Officialdom of a religious body, denomination, the whole body of Christians. It continues. Congregation, a public divine worship, the clerical profession as an adjective of or relating to the church, particularly in the British area, of or related to the established church. As a verb, churched, churching, churches, to bring to church, to receive one of its rights. Does that all sound very common? If we would go around the table like we've talked about before and ask people to define church, is that basically what you would get? And do you see how most of that refers to the building and not necessarily to the people in the building? The building and what is happening at the building. The services themselves, but not the people. Does everyone see that concept in the definition of the word here? Okay, let's look at some synonyms from the same dictionary for the word church. Temple, chapel, cathedral, tabernacle. Now, do you notice that all of those are buildings? In the Bible, the word translated as church, the word ekklesia, always refers to people and never to a building. Keep that in mind. So when you're looking at it in the scripture, the word here that we're talking about, ekklesia, always refers to people and not to a building. It never says they went to the church. It said the church, the organization, the people in the church are responsible for doing certain things. They're supposed to carry themselves in a certain way, are supposed to make things happen, but never to the building. So already we've got the translation of this word being church, and it always refers to a building, where the ecclesia thing never referred to a building. Is that a problem?
There are some people.
Correct, yeah. The idea of it, right, yes. Then the thing that I found most interesting here is when you go on down and look at the etymology of the word church. Now, I'm going to butcher some of these words, forgive me. These are not languages that I have studied or words that I have really paid attention to. You should glaringly see the point that I'm trying to make. Middle Eastern searche, from Old English, surish, ultimately from Light Greek kryakon, from Greek neuter of kryakos, of the Lord, from kryos, Lord, Master, akin to Sanskrit, sura, hero, warrior. Now, what is missing in that etymology? What? No building. Okay. Be more specific than that. My assumption here is that ecclesia is wrongly translated as church. Is there anything in that verse or in that etymology that supports my conclusion? Okay. Do you see ecclesia in any of those words from which church was derived? Is ecclesia anywhere in that thing? From the late Greek kryrokon, is that ecclesia? No, not even close. It's not even a part of the word ecclesia. From Greek neuter of kryakos, of the Lord. So, if people say the correct translation of ecclesia is church, why isn't ecclesia part of the etymology of the word church?
Individual person, that's what I'm seeing here. You're trying to neuter, that's a person, neuter
Okay.
whatever.
And neuter would be the organization more so than. Okay. But still no ecclesia. So is everyone okay with the fact that ecclesia is not part of the etymology of church? Okay, let's go on. Let's look.
Second, as was kind of hearing, and that sort of thing, and the other one is the spiritual way, and the spiritual way is the peace.
Right, yeah. And
Down in the reading, the church did this, church said this is how the church was like one entity, one person. Or they're going after the pastor in the church. Once again, you're fighting against one.
but if, as the translators say, the word church is the correct translation of ecclesia, shouldn't ecclesia or some form of it be part of the etymology of the word church? Shouldn't it be in its history somewhere of, hey, this word originated from here. Hey, this word came from here. Okay. Right. It's like the possession, the Lord's house, or what, right. Yeah, and that's really where the word church came from. So I can kind of see how it got applied over the centuries, but it's also glaringly obvious to me that ecclesia is not part of that. I've heard about it now for a few years, and I'm hearing about it increasingly frequently in the last few years, and in particular, last few months. More and more people are talking about it. It was very eye-opening to me when I first saw it. Obviously, it's more so now, but it was very eye-opening even then. All right, and then the dictionary entry continued. First known use as a noun before the 12th century, in the meaning defined as since one, you go back to number one in the list, and that's how it was used in the 12th century or before the 12th century. As an adjective, also before the 12th century, and as a verb, the 14th century. Now let's talk about that for a second. Approximately when did Jesus make the statement in Matthew? Take a wild guess when Jesus said that. When was Jesus alive? What? First century, right? Can we narrow it down to years? You're getting to what I'm saying. Yes. Jesus' ministry, 30 to 33 AD-ish. Everyone okay with that? The Gospel of Matthew, when was it written? There are some scholars that believe it happened in 80 to 95 AD. CE is the other word that they used before it actually got converted to. Right, but it started at zero. He was actually, and it doesn't really start at zero. The counter's off by a couple of years, so 32-ish. But it's really from his birth, not from his death, right? And CE means something else. And I don't remember what C. Okay. Anyway, the calendar's all messed up, and we could talk about the calendar. But anyway, we're talking 32-ish AD when Jesus first used the word ecclesia. Now, this is saying it wasn't, church didn't show up on the scene. Church did not start being used until the 12th century AD. Okay, when was Matthew written? Some scholars say 80 to 95 AD. My big problem with that is there's internal evidence in the book referring to the temple in Jerusalem, which had not yet been destroyed. And I would have thought that as significant as that event was, that it would have been noted in the gospel accounts had they been written after it occurred in 70 AD. So I think, and there's many people that also believe that Matthew was written before 70 AD. Either way.
You know, all Christians say
Right.
that. It was during that time frame that the church was established.
Right. Again, before 70 AD, because Acts doesn't talk about the fall of Jerusalem. And you would think that as big of a role as Jerusalem and the temple played in their worldview, that one of them would have noted when it occurred and what changed as a result of it occurring. It's not in there. They are acting as if Jerusalem and the temple are still standing when they write their books. So they were written, they might have not been released, but they were written prior to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Even if the other guys are right, you're talking 100 AD, the word church did not start being used until 1200 years later. Do we think that ecclesia is the correct, or church is the correct translation of ecclesia?
What did they use?
Right, okay.
That time, 12th century.
And I dare say it was closer to the correct translation, assembly or congregation or something. And one of Tyndale's earliest English, he did use that word. Bear with me, we're getting somewhere.
Like the Roman Empire referred to it. Did they?
We will get to that, not today. We will get to it.
I mean, city.
Right.
He wasn't writing to.
He was writing to all of the little congregations in that area, and they passed the letter around to everybody in that. Yes. Okay, that was Merriam-Webster. Let's make sure that that makes sense, and let's check it with another one. This is dictionary.com. Look up the word church in dictionary.com. A building for public Christian worship of God, a Christian religious service, the whole body of Christian believers, any organized group of Christian believers professing the same creed and acknowledging the same ecclesiastical authority. Isn't that interesting? Acknowledging the same ecclesiastical authority. A Christian denomination. That part of the whole Christian body of a particular denomination belonging to the same city, country, nation, etc. A body of Christians worshiping in a particular building or constituting one congregation. Ecclesiastical organization, power, and affairs as distinguished from state. The clergy and religious officials of a Christian denomination. Christian faith, the organized body of professing Christians before the Reformation. The Roman Catholic Church. The clerical profession or calling, any non-Christian religious society, organization, or congregation, or its place of public worship. An example there to help clarify that, the Church of Satan. So now church is even taking on things that don't necessarily reflect Christianity, more the structure of any entity that has some sort of religious context.
But this all people,
This is more people than the other one was, but it's still the organization and the structure, not really the people themselves. The etymology from this dictionary, first recorded before 900, so it upped it a couple years, a couple hundred years. Middle East, Circe, Old English, Circe, ultimately Greek, Kyrikon, Doma, the Lord's house, neuter of Kyrikos, of the master, Kyrios, master, from Kyros, power, Ios, Akios, akin to Judge Kirk, Kirche, Old Norse, Kirkja, Kirk. None of that really means anything to me. My point is ecclesia anywhere in that etymology? So why do we think that the correct translation of ecclesia is church? Just because somebody said that it was? All right, who said that it was? Any guesses? Who said that the correct translation of ecclesia is church? Where'd we get that? Who? Romans, okay.
me,
Again, we're talking that this word didn't show up to 900 AD. So 900, 800 years after Jesus first said it is when the word actually got introduced. I'm saying they're not the same thing. They don't come from the same vein. One should not be used in place of the other. Let's look at verse 18, the key verse from our passage, and let's examine this a little closer. Get both pages to agree here. Okay, Matthew 16:18 from the Voice. This is why I have called you Peter, rock, for on this rock I will build my church. The church will reign triumphant even at the gates of hell. I will build my church, and I've told you that word is ekklesia. Let's look at some other translations and see how some other versions might have translated church. My community in 2 versions. My congregation, 2 versions. My congregation, called out ones, one additional version. My church, a church so expansive with energy. That's kind of different, maybe the same. I don't know. I'm going to count it anyway. My assembly, 2 versions. My legislative assembly, 1 version. What's the total on all those versions that I just gave you? I went through them quick. Before I do that, there's a note in this last one that we read here. My legislative assembly is from the Passion Translation. There's a note, a footnote in the text right behind that phrase. Let's read that footnote. The Greek word for church is ekklesia and means legislative assembly or selected ones. This is not a religious term at all, but a political and a governmental term that is used many times in classical Greek for a group of people who have been summoned and gathered together to govern the affairs of a city. For Jesus to use this term means he's giving the keys of governmental authority in his kingdom to the church. Now, we will expound upon this as we get into this discussion more and more, but for now, just let this note be the working definition that we're working on. Not a religious term, political, it's a governmental term, classical Greek group of people who have been summoned and gathered together to govern the affairs of a city. To govern the affairs of a city. Now, from what we've learned already, where would they do that? At the gates. So Jesus didn't use this term accidentally. He didn't use this term just by happenstance. He is directing them to a concept that they should have been familiar with, and we'll talk more about that again in the future, of this group are the selected ones to rule at the gates the affairs of the city. Wouldn't that be very fitting in what else we've already discovered? Who selects them? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to guess they're political appointments, but there's some requirements as well.
Well, here first.
Right. Right.
Praying, standing against principalities and powers in the air that are detrimental to the righteousness of God in a city, in a county, in a state. We do that through the Spirit first before we ever
Yes.
manifest.
And then we're okay with that concept. Most people are okay with it. We need to do our praying, and we need to attack this thing on the spiritual, but they stop there. They don't take any action to translate whatever they got in the spirit into the natural. And that's where we have missed it.
In anything outside of the church business. You know, we've really not included those things as church business.
I have access online, and I do a lot of studying online, to 66 different English versions of the New Testament. Most of them are on BibleGateway.com, and I have a couple of others that aren't on BibleGateway.com. Anyway, I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying I went through a list of 66 English versions, and I came up with 9 out of those 66 that translated ekklesia in Matthew 16:18 as something other than church. So that means, 55 of them did? No, 57 of them did, whatever. 86% of the versions that I looked at use church as the translation for ekklesia. Why do you think that is? If I'm saying that it's wrong, why do you think that is?
He said you could read the Bible, and another one said you couldn't be burned at the stake, and it's the government. And another example was, I would heard. I said, In Mexico, it says alto. What does alto mean? It says stop. I said, no, we're a music class. Soprano is high, alto is low. I said, that might explain why you have all these California stops in alto. Then said stop, which who put it on the sign? The government.
Okay.
And so
Is it? Is it, oh, okay. So make, all of these things make me wonder about the initial start of the translation. I mean, it happened post decanonization of the Bible.
The translations had already started prior to that.
Canonization. Yeah.
That was when they made it official, but yeah, okay. That's a whole different discussion.
That, I mean, there's establishments that occurred there because that was the Roman Catholic Church established what the elders said that the Bible should be in its canonization, but from that, it makes me wonder if there's an interpretation of those things that they made church to be something that it should. I guess what
You're thinking the right thought. Let's get. Has anybody ever heard of a dude named King James? And I'm not talking about LeBron for you basketball fans. I don't even view him that way, but I'm just so we're clear. I'm not talking about him. But what did King James do? He authorized, he commissioned the translation that bears his name. Now, if you've done any Bible research at all, you realize that of all the Bible translations, all the English Bible translations, since its inception in 1611 until recently, the King James was the best-selling book ever, all books included, all versions of the Bible included. It has recently been passed by the NIV as the best-selling Bible version. But it was the standard for years and years and years. And it's not even close how many Bibles have been sold in the world versus any other book. It's not even close. So the fact that King James, and he didn't know that his legacy, the thing that he commissioned, was going to have that sort of impact. But the fact that it did, and if you've done any Bible research at all, you realize that most of the resource tools are built off of the King James. If you were to look at all the different commentaries and all the different lexicons and all the different things for the King James, and you add up all the ones based upon another version, all of them together, you're probably not even going to be close to how many there exist for the King James. Just simply because it's been around that long and it's so established, if you will, in Christendom. So if King James, and he's one of the people that translated as church, if that was the way that they did it and it has that much influence, you're fighting an uphill battle to do something different from the very beginning. Does that make sense? All right. I believe that his commissioning of translating Ekklesia as church was completely intentional and not accidental. Now, why do I say that? When King James gathered the 47 scholars necessary to create the King James Version, he gave them a list of 15 instructions. Number 3 of the instructions to the King James translators was the old ecclesiastical words to be kept as the word church, not to be translated congregation.
Reading assembly and business.
Yes. Yes. This called out assembly, this legislative assembly. He's saying one of the things, I'm paying you guys to write this translation, by the way. And one of my requirements when you write this translation is do not translate ecclesia as congregation. Instead, you will use the word church. Why would he do that? It was political. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go back to our working. And then that goes back to which books are supposed to be in there from the council. And yeah, I'm not worried about that necessarily today. My focus today is on Ekklesia and Church. Okay, we still got this note up on the front. Let's read this again. This is not a religious term at all, but a political and a governmental term. If he knew that, would that be of interest to him? Why would that be of interest to the king commissioning this translation? We can't let these guys get too carried away with this notion here, or I'm going to be threatened. Does that make sense? It's self-preservation. We're trying to remove possible issues here. Greek people who have been summoned and gathered together to govern the affairs of the city. A king would probably be very cognizant of that. And how would you squelch it? How would you deal with it? Make sure that your translation gave a different word that had a whole different connotation, that had a whole different sense, that had a whole different background behind it, a whole different scope behind it. And since he had the ability to do that in this case, he did. Everywhere ecclesia occurs in his translation and in all the ones that referenced it, church was the result.
Does it think that maybe stop with power, not necessarily control and power, but establishing proper authority for the Christian movement?
It was his being control. Bear with me. I got some more to read about King James that'll help you with his mindset a little bit. I put that up there, didn't I? Y'all saw that screen, right? Okay. Sorry. Okay. King James considered himself to be a god. During his reign, there was a dispute about the marriage of one of his sons. He disbanded Parliament because of their criticism. He said, monarchy is the greatest thing on earth. Kings are rightly called gods, since just like God, they have the power of life and death over all their subjects in all things. They are accountable to God only. So it is a crime for anyone to argue about what a king can do. Now, wouldn't that fly in the face of this assembly, these called out ones that Jesus is trying to put in place with a moral constitution, with a moral basis, with a moral and
making them to a certain degree as useless as far as what they were supposed to be doing.
yes.
Essentially conforming.
King James appointed himself as the head of the Church of England. He established a hierarchy over the church that he could mostly control. There were some Puritans that challenged this practice. They proposed using presbytery along with those bishops that he had put in place. King James saw this as an attempt to diminish his power in the church and angrily rebuked them. How dare anyone try to limit his absolute power? By the way, if you wanted to carry that forward, any reference in our political system to separation of church and state deals with this concept, not with Christians being involved in politics. It's not in our Constitution, regardless of what you may hear. It's not there. Go look. It's not there. It came from a letter between Thomas Jefferson and the Danbury Baptists. And what Jefferson was basically saying in that letter, we have set up our system so that we have not allowed the creation of a national religion. We're not saying anything about the people that can be involved or that their persuasions can follow their opinions about government. But we're saying that the president of the US or the king of England or whoever will not be the head of the national church. So there's a wall built that says the government is not going to interfere in the affairs of the church by creating a national religion. Anyway,
Based on freedom.
yes, from this idea, from this concept that King James was part of initiating about making himself as the king, also the head of the church, the official state church.
Is that we were the undesirables. We were the prisoners of war after the war, or we were warriors no longer needed. Because you had the Celts, you had, all the Irish and all the different people up there, stuff like that. And he ruled all of them. And you got all these people that are trained to fight. And like the Scots, they were like soldiers of fortune. You know what they're from, trying to play water. So they're shipped to the Caribbean islands, they're shipped to Australia, and they're shipped to America. They're prisoners or servants, kinds of words they use for that, who are slaves. And they ruled us, and if they didn't like it, they controlled everything, they had all these landlords, they would shut off our roots, starve us to death. So we were shipped over. America was established on slavery, white slavery. All those border countries, so I think people like that want to be true monarch. And so we got over here, and they started building up. We're like, we're not doing that no more. And like you said, we wrote our Constitution. Yeah, we're not going back to that. And then our North and South became the ones of the South, in particular, wanted that. And the North said, no, we want. That's why the bloody sword never happened. It's actually it's not, and they look at them blacks. And later, they were cheaper. They could do that right there. They had to deal with all of the problems they had twice because of justice. And then one of them paid them. That's how we could get their passage over. But they want all the British monarchs to get on, want to get rid of us. We had the same kind of, they had the same kind of behavior towards World War II. They didn't really want it. Until they were slaughtered. Because they wanted
And realized they couldn't win without us.
and they still have that illusion.
Anyway,
That's good.
so if the correct translation of Ekklesia had been made and all these versions had been released to all these people that were going to be reading their Bibles, hopefully reading their Bibles, it was phenomenal in the sense that now the common person had access to the Word of God. And they didn't for hundreds of years. You had to rely on the priest or the speaker or whoever, whatever his title was. You had to rely on them to tell you what it said. Now you had the ability to look at it for yourself and read it for yourself and contemplate it for yourself. So if this book goes out and all these versions, instead of Jesus saying, I'm going to build my church, if it all said, I'm going to build my legislative assembly, I'm going to build my governmental structure, could that have posed a threat? Could that have been something that might have been risky for him to authorize? Every person that read it would then be a potential threat to the throne, to the security of the throne. King James couldn't let that happen. He instructed the translators to always use a much more benign word for this Bible that the English-speaking world would be reading. And he did that. He inserted this word church, which meant nothing of ecclesia. It had no basis in ecclesia, but it was a much more controllable word. It was a much more ecclesiastical word. It was a much more structural word rather than rebels that get all fired up about being in charge of local governments, being in charge of the local areas, the politics, the culture of these local areas. So with all this said, what is it about this word ecclesia that warrants such attention and effort to conceal? Is there something significant there that we probably need to realize in order to fully grasp what Jesus was actually talking about?
It goes back to what I told Peter, here in Matthew, was that, the church is gonna come against the gates, and the gates of hell are not gonna prevail against the church. And if they actually realize what they were to be doing, and King James understood, well, if they understand what this is here, then it's gonna be a real problem.
Right. For me.
It's gonna be a real problem, so we've got to make sure that we keep them in a proper place. So that they don't lose that, because they can have great power.
Right. Yes.
People at the top want power. And
Yes.
say-
Yes.
Seeing it in our country right now.
Yes.
You know, and I think that a lot of King James was based on that, taking the power away from the people.
Particularly in this instance. Now, I'm not saying the King James is a bad translation. I'm not saying you should chunk all of them out and throw it all. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that in this case, on this word, there was a reason that he would be motivated to alter it.
God, anything else?
Peter got his revelation in our theme verse from God. Yes.
All that. I mean, that's easy.
Yes. He became part of the called out group when he had the revelation that Jesus was the Christ.
As we acknowledge.
So, and why he changes it is because he don't want us, anybody to rise up like you said, you know, where we say, well, I'm getting called to share a Bible study class, you know, no, you have no.
Right. Yeah.
You don't have the power to do that.
But do you see how easy it would be to manipulate? All you had to do is change this word and change what this word, the connotation that he had to change one word. How that word is translated everywhere in Scripture, and our whole concept of Christianity goes down a different road.
That use that word, so like the word congregation figured by Puritans is either translations like William, that emphasizes local and democratic assembly of believers versus a hierarchy or physical thing. Whereas King James views a political threat, views the congregation as a threat to authority if the Bible describes the body of believers as an assembly. Like Ekklesia, it undermines the need for a centralized king-led.
So what was he so afraid of?
A people and assembly or that power, the democratic election, this kind of a democratic type of assembly where they came and governed as a group of people rather than the hierarchy of an established king, who's preserving his power.
And a lot of times, you know, they say, how do you control a herd of cats, you know? A lot of times when people get together, they would have such different opinions about something. I think that would be one thing that he think would be destabilizing, and he wanted to control that.
So, and what does that say about us that we bought this hook, line, and sinker for however many years? How many hundreds of years? Have we just accepted this status quo and not really given any thought, not really given any attention to it? Don't you see Satan at work in that too? That, okay, these guys are going to be a problem for me if they figure out who they are. If they figure out what they were destined, what they were ordained, what they were commissioned to do, they're going to create issues for me. So it's to my advantage to keep them in the dark to the extent and for as long as absolutely possible about who they really are and what they've really been entrusted with. And by and large, he's been very successful. But thank God there's some people that are finally starting to get some light about what is going on. What is the real mission, the real statement, the real structure, the real empowerment, the real objective behind this thing that Jesus put in motion.